Hello, and welcome to the Old Farm Bus Podcast. This is the back of the bus session.
Hello and welcome to the Old Farm Bus, Back of the Bus Sessions podcast. Today I've got a fantastic guest on. I must say, I go to the gym fit in Ripley, you should all get down. And at least 20 people have told me to get this man on. And finally, we've gone about sorting it out. I'm not going to hash this name, I'm going to say it right. We have got Sam Donegani on the podcast. How close was I to the name?
That's spot on.
Donegani.
Yeah, that's perfect.
It's beautiful, mate.
Thank you very much.
Just tell the listeners where they would have heard that name from before.
I'm told it's Irish-Italian. If you take the I off, it's Donegan. So
okay,
Lonnie Donegan in there somewhere. But
but you don't know too much about the ancestry of the name.
No, not really. As we were talking about earlier, now my paternal grandfather was Welsh, so it's a mixed bag. I'm a mongrel. I'm a mixed breed.
We're all a mongrel now,
aren't we?
Yeah. Sam, so many people told me to get you on the bus. Honestly, everybody you can think of in the reception of the gym, back doors of the gym, they're all saying, yeah, honestly, speak to Sam, he's the man. What do you think that is? Do you stand at the reception all day, every day, just spouting your views off, or
Absolutely not. No.
What, have you just got good connections at the gym?
I don't know. I listen a lot. I answer questions if they're asked. And I guess I'm a jack of all trades and master of none. But the full phrase apparently is jack of all trades, master of none is better than master of one. So it's I know a little bit about a lot of stuff. I'm a synthesist, a collector of information, and it helps you have a sort of a 40,000 foot view of things, which I think is maybe the reason why people have suggested me.
Well, I've only been in your vicinity a handful of times, and I've really enjoyed it. I mean, we're at some pretty macho times. We went to the boxing together. Yep. But it is interesting where you're around a character, and there's just a know there, an understanding where I go, I want to find out more about what's going on in them cogs, turning that mind. I can imagine that you've read a lot of books, you've taken in a lot of information, but you're also, and I said this to you today at the gym, you're somebody with a really nice energy, like a friendly, happy vibe. A lot of my friends that I feel, I sometimes say this, too smart for their own good, where they've just seemed to have really wrapped themselves into this sort of way of thinking, fearful line of where the world's going, conspiratorial sort of directions, sure. I'd say. I feel, how have you managed to keep the sanity about you, if you have? If you're at home rocking, please tell us the truth and let us know. But from my genuine understanding, you do know what's going on in the world.
As much to the degree that anyone can know the truth.
Yes.
So.
But sometimes there's conspiracies, and then suddenly they get plucked out of the box of conspiracy because it becomes a genuine fact.
Yeah.
We know CIA with the Charles Manson times. Did you have heard about that book?
I've not read it, but go on.
There's a guy come out recently. He was on a Rogan podcast, but again, he was in the CIA at the time of dealing with Manson, and there were so many times that police were arresting him, and then they were just letting him go and saying this is way above our pay grade, because what it was a campaign to besmirch the hippie generation and the acid generation and psychedelics in such a way. But that's just a known thing now, because when this book came out, all the labs just closed down the next day after this book come out. So that was one. I suppose the Epstein Island.
Yep.
Again, that was something Alex Jones had been spouting for years and years and years and years.
Alex Jones, your David Icke.
But then again, it goes into the mainstream after a very short period, and we go, oh, here's the truth again.
Yeah, and so suddenly it's part of the zeitgeist, yeah.
Exactly that. So I do want to just talk about, from the start, how do you keep your sanity about you and not get too wrapped into it, even when you do go on them avid paths of finding information?
It's a very interesting question. And I haven't always been. There was a phase. I've never really been in the depths. I've never been sort of suicidal or anything like that, thankfully. But I've been in a position where I'm like, I want to get off this ride. Like feeling like I know all this stuff. Whether I mean, loads of things that I believe to be true could tomorrow be proven to be completely incorrect. I can be wrong about loads of things. But we'll probably get to that about how you get a sense of what is actually true, objectively true, objective and subjective truth being very different. But these horrible things that are happening in the world, they're happening anyway, whether I like it or not, whether I'm happy or sad. Two people that I really respect out in the world. So Ram Dass, I'm sure a lot of listeners, I'm sure you're familiar with Ram Dass, and he'd had his whole awakening. He'd gone off. He'd obviously renamed himself to Ram Dass, Baba Ram Dass, and he had a near-death experience. I can't remember if he was actually pronounced dead or not, but he had a near-death experience, and then at that point, he was challenged as to his approach. And he was sort of off avoiding real life and in the ashrams and meditating in the caves or whatever he was doing and having a sort of an individuated blissful experience, but ignoring real life, if you like. And whatever the voice was, whether it was, his own higher consciousness or whether it was God or whatever, said to him, was sending him back. And Ram Dass asked, well, what am I meant to do? Aren't I done here? Haven't I learned everything? I'm this high Baba, that all these people respect me, like millions of people around the world listen to me. And the reply was, you're human, aren't you? And he was like, well, yeah, obviously. I said, well, maybe you should try the curriculum. So the point being, you can be, it's a quote attributed to Jesus, but be in the world, but not of the world. But there's no point sort of doing all the inner work on yourself, and then only being able to function in an isolated space, like in your own little Zen room or on your meditation cushion or whatever. So you've got to be able to function in the world, and that sort of take the curriculum thing really resonated with me in that you have to participate in life, regardless of what's going on, whether you're happy, sad, or whatever. It's still happening. So, you may as well be happy and upbeat and love him or loathe him. There's some real wisdom, I think, that's come from Conor McGregor over the years. And one thing that really stuck with me that he said was, at the end of the day, you've got to feel some way, so you may as well feel invincible. And I'm not suggesting that I feel invincible, but to a large extent, you have control over the way you feel. It's a Stoic principle. So if anyone's interested in sort of Stoicism, going down the sort of Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus routes, they're really interesting guys to read into. And Ryan Holloway's has done some brilliant work recently on bringing Stoicism to the general public. But it's also a therapeutic principle as well, that you only have control over your own thoughts, words, and actions. So I can think about all the terrible things going on in the world, and I can dwell on it, and then I can have that internal dialogue, and then it'll make me act and behave a certain way, and I'll be incredibly depressed or incredibly angry, or I can acknowledge that those things are going on, but then have the conversation with myself that me putting more negative energy out into the world isn't benefiting anyone. It's certainly not benefiting me. It's not benefiting the people around me. So it's a pragmatic and a practical approach, really. It doesn't make any sense. It's not useful to anyone to be perpetually angry at the world or perpetually fearful. That's not to say that those dark moments don't come, but it's about being pragmatic and practical, which from someone who's kind of a woolly spiritualist at heart, it really does come right down to practicality.
Yeah, because you can get lost in some people where it seems to be hippiness, spirituality, and bananas, if you know what I mean there.
I do love bananas.
But that woo-woo side of things, and to actualize it, to put it into practice, and to manifestate that in front of people is a completely different thing. And another thing you were saying there that I remember always stuck with me was so simple, but my friend just said to me, you create your reality. And that was one of those... Oh my God, in every moment, in every opportunity, I get to be the decider of what goes on in this moment right now.
Yeah.
And it gave me so much power then, and I've never forgot that. And those times where I'm human,
Yeah.
I've hit lulls, I've hit ebbs and flows, and the darkness comes. But just to be able to sort of remind myself, Mikey, remember, this is the reality you're creating now.
Yeah.
What you're allowing in and what you're emanating out is all down to you. So
I think there's a really important nuance to that as well, though, because there's a dangerous side to that. That, and I'm not for a say, I don't think
I
that
love
you're
nuance, mate. I love it. No, I talk about greys all the time, so jump in.
So it's become very prevalent within sort of the self-help community to obviously take hold of the mantra that I create my own reality, and yes, to a large extent you do, but there's also an objective reality. So quantum physics shows that our thoughts, our presence, the observer effect literally has a physical effect on subatomic matter, but there is also this objective reality that you can't ignore, and there's a huge danger within the sort of the new age, the self-help community, to kind of put your head in the sand and just pretend that everything is okay, and sort of lean on that. Oh, if I'm thinking about it, if I'm imagining it, then it's all okay. But the two sides of the same coin. The subjective reality that you are creating internally with your thoughts, words, and actions, but then there's also, you have to be mindful of the objective reality that there is a whole bigger part of the world, of the universe, that really doesn't give a shit about what you're creating, and things will happen anyway.
Yes.
And it's you've got to be okay with that. You've got to reconcile that. Otherwise, the danger of what I'll call the head in the sand approach is that when things do go badly, which they will, you can't cope with it. And then it becomes a sort of a victim mentality, and there's a lot of blame. So if you look at, and I'm not rubbishing the Secret and Rhonda Byrne's work.
I was just going to say to you, what do you feel to The Secret then? The laws of attraction we're talking about.
I think there's a lot in it. I think absolutely, but Gary Vaynerchuk, he summed it up really well. He said the law of attraction doesn't work unless you do. You've got to. Everything starts with your inner dialogue with your thoughts, but it has to drive positive action as well. And where a lot of people come unstuck and actually end up worse off than they started when they go down that law of attraction self-help route is when things don't go the way that they've envisaged, which ultimately at some point they won't. They just blame themselves. They're like, oh, well, I didn't manifest hard enough. I didn't visualize clearly enough. I didn't do enough mood boards, or I didn't think about it for long enough, or maybe I wanted it too much, because there's a whole idea within that train of thought, within the Secret and the law of attraction and all the Abraham stuff, that the act of wanting something actually pushes it away. Because, and I get that, it makes sense in that if you think about wanting something, so let's put it in a really really easily accessible context. When you're hungry and you're thinking about you're wanting the banana, as you mentioned, or whatever it is, or the burger or whatever, by thinking about the wanting of it, you are dwelling on the absence of that thing. So with the fact that our thoughts are very powerful and very creative, it will just perpetuate that. You get more of what you focus on. And that is hugely true. But people using those tools have to be very careful that they acknowledge that there are things that they can't control, and they've got to be okay with that. And that's where stoicism comes in. And a lot of people, I think, see those as polar opposites. Sort of the new age self-help. I sound like I'm talking about it in a derogatory manner, but I don't mean that at all.
You don't sound like you are either. You're just being balanced with it.
But that the law of attraction side of things and the sort of more stoic, you can't control anything out there in the world, actually do agree with each other.
Sort of a duality.
Yeah. And I think that's something that I struggled to reconcile for a long time, because where I started on this whole journey was with Paul McKenna, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah,
he's coming on next week, by the way.
So I guess we've got time for a little aside. So I was in a previous professional life. I was on an away job in a lovely hotel in Austria. I was there on my own for the weekend, but I'd got the privilege of doing some great things while I was there. So I was working for Aston Martin at the time. So I was out there working on a brand new model in a brand new facility in a beautiful city, which sounds ideal. And I was sat in my hotel room, sort of fairly depressed, just dwelling on the sort of the negative aspects. So I'm like, oh, I'm in this city I don't know. It's Sunday. I'm on my own. Don't know where to go to eat. Blah, all this ridiculous bullshit that's going around my head, that internal monkey mind. And I started thinking, there's got to be something that I can do about this. And landed on Paul McKenna's "Change Your Life in 7 Days" book.
Okay.
And he's, I mean, a lot of people know him from his hypnotherapy work on TV back in the 90s, and I think he had a bit of a fall from grace, if I remember. I don't know, something went wrong on one of the shows or something.
He came back into the limelight, I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly over the past 10 years or so, he's developed some more popularity again. But that book's absolutely brilliant. So he learnt from one of the originators of NLP, Neurolinguistic programming. And it's a really pragmatic book about tools that you can use to sort of change your perception. And that sort of started me off on the path. So,
and this was practical advice then?
Yeah. It's sort of exercises that you can, and I can't for the life of me remember what any of them were, but it's basic sort of neurolinguistic programming stuff. So sort of anchoring, if you've come across that, where you get yourself into a positive state by visualizing and imagining how it would feel to feel a certain way. So say you want to feel really relaxed in a particular situation, you take yourself back to a time when you were really relaxed, or if you can't do that, you think about someone like a role model who exudes what you want, and then just imagine being them, and then you build yourself up into that state, and then you do some kind of simple but fairly unique physical movement. So maybe squeeze thumb and ring finger together or something. So something you're not going to accidentally do a lot, but repeatedly do that whilst you built yourself up into this state. And then when you need to draw on that becomes an anchor, a trigger for it. It's a bit like Pavlov's dogs. It's just, it's conditioning. So it's those kind of really simple but effective techniques. And that was sort of the start of learning. And then from there sort of got down the law of attraction route, and then diverged off into stoicism and all kinds of other things as well.
Wow. I mean, the Pavlovian conditioning, isn't that act upon and then a treat? So that reward.
Yeah, to a large extent. So, I mean, from a human perspective, it's like you always stop at a red light. It's just it's just repetition of anything. So I think Pavlov's original experiment was ringing a bell when he was about to feed his dogs.
Yeah. Okay.
So after X amount of conditioning, X amount of repetitions, ringing the bell would automatically make the dog salivate. And I mean, people still use it to train dogs today.
Now, going into that story a little bit, and then you decided, I want to change how I'm feeling right now. I think a lot of people aren't very reflective enough to do that. They just allow it to build and build and build. As a young person, would you have bouts of quote-unquote depression or darkness or really struggles, let's say, and did you always know that wasn't a natural instinct, that wasn't a natural feeling, and want to change it then? Or was you sort of more in a happier lifestyle as a younger person, and it built into when you're a bit older?
That's a good question. I probably now, based on sort of more modern diagnoses, I probably have been depressed at points, and something that comes to mind is my parents, when I was a teenager, used to take me aside and going, you really need to try and cheer up, and that's obviously the most unhelpful, and it was done with absolute love. My parents were amazing,
purity.
But yeah, as anyone that struggled with these things, and obviously I think most people have struggled far worse than I have, will know being told to cheer up is useful to the degree of 2/10 of fuck all. So yeah, I mean, one thing that I think has always helped before I'd sort of got hold of any tools and techniques is I've always been physically active, which is it's huge for I mean, I'm sure anyone that suffers with any kind of depressive tendencies, and certainly when I've been at my low ebbs, and people that I've talked to that have been in similar and worse positions, see, you don't want to do anything. You don't want to be out in the world. You certainly don't want to exercise. You don't want to eat well, and it's a vicious circle. Obviously, you're not getting the endorphin release. Your circulatory system's not working properly. Your lymphatic system's not working properly, and again, a slight aside, but it's worth talking about. So when we have particularly negative thoughts or negative internal dialogue, that obviously has a biochemical impact on the body. And if you're inactive, your body's not cleaning itself out properly. So physical activity, and one of the reasons that I do yoga is because of the inversions and things are great for the lymphatic system and flushing all the crap out of the body. But if you aren't physically active, that natural detoxing isn't happening. So that gets stuck somewhere, and that gets stuck in your body fat. So I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but if you start losing weight, you can find that sort of old feelings come out, or if you've ever done any intermittent fasting, when you sort of started trying to do it, you can find some slightly crazy mood swings, and that's sort of that comes when the body fat is starting breaking down, and those old emotions that are stored biochemically start getting released into the system, and you start feeling them again.
Wow.
So having always been physically active has always given me an outlet for that. So as a teenager, I was a competitive swimmer. I was training 6 days a week and then competing all weekend. So no matter how bad I felt, I guess I never got the opportunity to dwell on it. And I've never really reflected on that. So thank you for that. But yeah, that's...
Can I intersect in that?
Yeah, sure.
You're saying emotions are held in the body, but old emotions and past emotions are held within what part of the body, like particles in the body and cells in the body? And
I can't recall exactly. There's a whole part of sort of yogic teaching that goes into this, where it's sort of where do you, if you're scared, where do you feel it?
My gut.
Exactly. If you're angry, where do you feel that?
My head, like burning inside. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So we feel emotions in our body.
Wow.
It stands to reason if you don't exercise them, as in exorcise, if you don't get rid of them, then they stay there. So
this is the best part of the podcast ever. Honestly, you're doing something to me now where I'm like, I want to remember this. Remember this, future Mikey. I'll be watching this back.
So what happens if you think about being in a park somewhere with a pond or on a river and there's some ducks? Ever seen two ducks have a conflict?
Yes. Yeah.
What happens?
They go at each other nearly for a while. In my head, I'm thinking of cockerels as well. They'll just go till battle royale, till death.
Well, let's take cockfighting out of it, shall we? But
cockfighting out of it. I'm just on a farm, man. That's all I could picture. So I was like, cockerels are like ducks, aren't they? But yeah, they have a squabble.
Yeah, they'll have a squabble, but then almost invariably, when it ends, which it does, the ducks will then just shake off the feathers, flap the wings, and that's it. They've dropped it. They've got rid of it.
Right. Okay.
They don't dwell on it like we do. We keep hold of it. So yeah, everything is inextricably linked within the human organism. So you've not got a physical body and a mental body and an emotional body and a spiritual body separately. They're all interlinked. That's why you feel your emotions in parts of your body, and that's why, if you want to feel confident walking into somewhere, a friend of mine who's he's the best classroom teacher I've ever seen, he said, walk into the classroom like Peter Pan. So chest out, shoulders back, strut in, and you can't feel down and depressed. We can't feel two things at the same time, and that posture makes you feel confident. So all of our emotions and our physicality, they're all interlinked. So if you're not exercising emotions, if you're not dealing with them either through physical release, verbal emotional release, or some other method, then they're going to stay in there, and those chemical waste products, for want of a better term, that your body's producing gets locked up in your body fat.
Dude, this is great. This is the best content. Because what I was trying to sort of work out from what you've been talking about, as you as a human as well, you were talking about, is it subjective and objective? The non-negotiables, is it the non-negotiables? The things that you can't what is it where you're trying to deal with the outside reality that you can't change?
Yeah.
What were you saying about that?
I think I labelled it objective, but the non-negotiables, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, there are things that you can't change. So no matter how much you visualise, I don't know, Mount Everest falling down, it's not going to do that on your watch.
That was what I was trying to work out. As you, as a human, was that sort of part of the problem in the psyche, that you were always trying to change those? So it was mainly the things you couldn't change that you were trying to change that sort of made you feel in a very unhappy, uncomfortable state.
Perfect. Yeah, you've nailed it.
And it was, yeah, I tried. I got there in the end. I was really trying to piece it together. How did you become conscious of that? Where was it in that book that you read from Paul McKenna?
It started with the Paul McKenna book. Then I did a hypnotherapy and NLP qualification. So spent months of weekends doing. Just give the guy a shout out. A guy called Jason Fletcher that runs a therapy business called Mindworks. Absolutely fantastic trainer. I don't know if he's still doing it actually. But
the word I wanted was uncontrollables. And
yeah.
Controlling the uncontrollables.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think today I'll still have those. I'll still have those moments. You know, where you're sitting in traffic and you're pissed off because you're not getting home fast enough or whatever. But then it comes back to practicality. It's not useful to be sat in traffic pissed off.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not useful to be annoyed that you've burnt your dinner, or it's not useful to be annoyed that your dog thought your hand was a stick when you blinded her with your head torch the other night. It doesn't help anyone. So it's about being practical. But the root of, I think, a lot of people's negative emotions, sadness, whatever you want to call it, is the fact that we're taking issue with the world. We're trying to control things that we can't control. Arguing with what is it's an exercise in futility. You can't change the present. You can work positively to change the future, but what is right now is that.
And when you were talking about, we got into quantum really.
Yeah.
And vibrations.
Yeah, how did we get there so quickly?
Yeah, I knew it was gonna. When we got into the quantum, and you're saying some of it can be controlled by what you manifest and your reality, and you can change the reality in front of you. But then there's uncontrollables that you can't. Are there any quantum experiments of recent that have explained this and depicted this in the best kind of way?
So one of the things that really, I think, illustrates the influence of the human mind over physical matter is wave particle duality. So
is that the double slit?
Yeah. So
okay.
So if we talk in terms of light simultaneously exists as a wave and a particle, but it doesn't behave as a particle until it's observed as one. That's what's called collapsing the wave function. So the same is true of electrons. So photons of light or electrons could be anywhere within a particular pattern at any given point, but when they're observed, they're then the double slit experiment is that once observed, a particular photon will only go through one out of the two slits. So that's a fairly common one. But there's I think it's still going in the US, the Institute of Noetic Sciences. So noetics is the branch of sort of quantum physics that's interested in the effect of thought on physical matter.
Right. Okay.
And they've done all kinds of things to physically prove that we have our thought has an impact on subatomic particles. And what was his name? I'm going to pronounce this wrong. I think his name was Fujimoto. Japanese scientist who did some amazing work.
Sound like a Tekken character.
Yeah, was it? So he did, and it's an experiment that you can replicate for yourself. Essentially, he froze water in repeatable containers, and then he wrote particular words on those containers. So, like, he wrote really angry stuff on one, like hateful things, just the worst things you could think of, basically. And then he wrote loving things on another.
Did he have one that was neutral as well?
I hope he did. As a scientist, he should have had a control. I can't remember, but I imagine he did.
I heard of a similar thing with rice. I think there was a rice experiment, but there was the three containers, but hate, love, and one was neutral. But again, one went mouldy. The hate-filled one went all mouldy.
And that's the rice.
Yeah, the rice. The loving one absolutely didn't change, and the neutral one just had sort of elements of fluff on it, but was going in that direction, but left neutral. It was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly the same thing with the water, but it was about the patterns that the crystals formed. So the negative one was all sort of haphazard, jagged, really sort of angry-looking crystals, and the positive, loving one had some really beautiful sort of geometric, sort of snowflakey patterns in. And that's something I've done it myself and frozen just bottles of water. It wasn't the most scientific, granted, but you do it in your own freezer, and it really does. It kind of hits home at that point that if my words are having an impact on physical matter around me, then it stands to reason that not only they're having an impact on my wider surroundings and the real world. To an extent, there's the objective reality that will not change based on whatever you put out there, unless collectively we put enough out. That's maybe another aside. But also what effect your self-talk and your words are having on your own physiology. And we're what's the statistic? Are we 70, 75%, 80% water? So, if it's having that effect on a bottle of water that you've just written some words on, your perpetual self-talk that's going on day in, day out.
Do you feel this is where most sort of ailments in the body come from, and illnesses?
There's a huge aspect to that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of illness is psychosomatic manifestation. I mean, it's certainly not the only thing. I mean, the crap that we put into our bodies in terms of processed food, it's getting increasingly difficult to get. Obviously, natural food, the water that we drink, and the other stuff that we drink as well. Obviously, artificial sweeteners and all that sort of thing that I think most people know the risks of. Environmental pollution. Obviously, we're bathed in electromagnetic frequencies, which are completely unnatural as a habitat for humans, and they're doing untold damage. But a lot of that can be overcome, I think, if you if you have a good degree of, if you've done the inner work, if you've got a strong degree of self-talk and that sort of positive perception. And it's not going to override everything, obviously, but it does have a huge impact.
There's going to be so many takeaways from me today, but we kind of got there, and I'm going to definitely clip this out of the podcast. I do little mini podcasts, but to be nuanced and be able to sort of say, listen, there's uncontrollables in our life and there's controllables. The vibrations you choose to put out into the ether are always going to be a benefit if they can be of higher vibration as possible.
Absolutely.
And that emanates outwards and changes those vibrations around you and other people. I've heard of this experiment that you may know of where people got in a township that was sort of riddled with crime, and they all meditated. And then again, in this sort of township, after every Sunday they're coming together, manifesting and meditating on positivity, it halved the crime rate in the town.
Where was that? Can you remember where that was?
Was it in America? I thought it was a small town in America.
I know I've read about similar work done in Thailand. That was it? It's probably. I'm sure it's been done in a number of places.
Tried it again. It was on a Russell Brand book that I read about, but I think a few places have tried to sort of implement it, and I'm definitely going to take away with this podcast about what I choose to put into the ether and bring to the show. But I think a fact that myself, and a lot of my friends can forget are those uncontrollables. And you've said perfectly in this podcast, you can beat yourself up because the reality outside isn't how you expected it to be, even when you're bringing the highest vibration forward. But to sort of just have a very Buddhist philosophy in that, or just an acceptance of that, and not to fight against it, and keep remembering, well, what is it that I can do for the now, for myself and those around me, for the best of my ability? That's my big takeaway. So we're going to go in anyway, but dude, from what you said, I was really trying to sit there, digest it, and piece it together.
Yeah.
And there's so much beauty within it, and I think it's something that a lot of people have overseen or underseen, that there's two sides to this. It's not, here's the laws of attraction, this is what works, or that's all woo-woo science and whatever. There's so much you can implement in your life on a daily and introduce for the betterment. And the laws of attraction for me is, even if you don't believe it, imagine you try it out. It's only going to be a benefit, isn't it?
Yeah, it can't hurt, can it?
Yeah, the
think,
principles.
Yeah.
I suppose that you are right. You always hear the most sort of the best side of it, stories, and then when people try and bring it into their life and it doesn't work the way that they've seen it depicted from the top and in the media portrayal of it, then they think, oh, it's all a waste of time. They'll probably miss out a lot of the moments in their life where it actually has worked, and they don't see that as an important moment that could have been actually seen as, that's really beneficial.
Yeah, and people will miss those synchronicities. Like we were talking about before we started up, about you getting the bus and just having been chatting to a random guy in the gym that you never met before, and lo and behold, you just mentioned wanting a bus, and his mate sold you one. It's so you have manifested that to a large degree, and I think that's probably one of, well, it is the reason why the narrative, the social, the global zeitgeist is controlled to the degree that it is, because if everyone in the world, the 7.8 billion people or however many there are now, were all collectively visualizing and working towards the sort of world that we all deserve, it would come about. But there are systems and mechanisms and forces in place to control that narrative and control people's thinking, to keep everyone bound in fear and in negative emotions. So I am going to contradict myself slightly here, but the world's full of contradictions, in that while I've said that your thoughts, words and actions and your own sort of manifestations are sort of one side of the coin versus the objective reality, as you very eloquently summed up, by having that positive mindset, by visualizing, by working towards what you do want to see in the world, you are having an effect on that objective reality. Because while you are only a small part of the overall collective, it's much better that that small part of the overall collective is working in the positive direction than in the negative direction. And there's some really interesting work done by Dr. David R. Hawkins, who essentially quantified the relative power of different emotions. So if you've read or looked into the law of attraction, the Abraham stuff, you've probably seen the sort of Abraham emotional guidance scale, which starts with hopelessness or despair down on the bottom, and then climbs up through negative emotions, through sort of neutral emotions, up through sort of hope, positivity, and then up to love and joy. And David Hawkins kind of took it a step further and actually calibrated them through experiments that demonstrate how your self-talk impacts your physical strength, and use some really interesting experiments to come up with this quantified scale. And it's a logarithmic scale. So the takeaway, really, what I'm trying to get to, is that a positive emotion that might feel as far above neutral as a particular negative emotion. So let's say like love and hate, taking the extremes, they feel about as far away from the center point, but love is exponentially greater in its strength than hate. So it doesn't take a majority of people to be putting positive vibes, positive emotion, positive visualizations out in the world to actually make a change. Critical mass, actually, to bring about large-scale change, is far, far, far below 51%, because of the incredible power of positive emotions.
What was the experiment they did?
So the most simple one is to
It
get.
was bench press.
It was more like a lateral raise, actually. So it was the subjects would stand with a partner or with one of the scientists, and they would repeat several times something negative, like I'm a hopeless, worthless person or something, and they had to say it with feeling, really, really mean it, and then they hold their arm aloft, and the experimenter would then push their arm down. Obviously, there is an argument that that's not particularly scientific, because how are they going to calibrate it? But then they repeated it with positive affirmations and really, really meant it. Like the flip side of that, like I'm a worthy, wonderful person, whatever the wording was, and 100% of the time,
Couldn't move the arm.
they were much, much stronger. Yeah.
Wow.
So obviously you could do that much more scientifically. You know, you could put someone in some kind of lateral raise equipment or whatever. But essentially, and David Hawkins did decades and decades of work on this kind of thing. Fantastic book called Power versus Force.
What's that called? That has it got a name behind it?
It has.
Kinesthesiology or something.
Yes.
I've heard of it done by. It's just, I think I hashed it there, but it's close. Kinesthesiology, because I heard it done making somebody really imagine their deepest, darkest fears. And I saw it again where the arms would just go straight down.
Yeah, the words deserted me. I want to say kinesthesiology.
Yes,
Is that right?
I think you're bang on. Yeah, that was from a. Can always find out where the bits of information have collated from, and that was Ricky Gervais.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he explained it on one of his shows, again in a joke. But I thought, that sounds really fascinating. I need to go and look at that. And I looked at loads of YouTube videos on it, and it was absolutely fascinating. And me and Chrissy tried it. It genuinely did work. Again, I don't know if the placebo effect was there for me or so on. But apparently, even if you know if the placebo is a placebo, it still works.
Yeah, and if it's effective, it doesn't really matter, does it? But it goes quite deep, and it's kind of spooky to see how effective it is actually, that kind of experimentation, in that you can do a double blind version of it. So you can use it as a lie detector, and you can use it to find out what substances are inherently harmful or helpful to you. So I played around with this a bit a number of years ago.
My man.
It's not as exciting as you think. It's really boring actually, but it proved that the kinesthesiology testing is legit, at least in my mind.
Yeah.
In that I put in one envelope, I put some artificial sweetener. Everyone knows that shit and horrendous for you and has links to cancers and all kinds of stuff. And I put a rocket leaf in another envelope. And then, to make sure that I wasn't having any influence on it, I did this with my mum and dad and got them to test. So neither of them knew what was in the envelope. So one of them was holding the envelope while the other one was testing, and then switched over. And lo and behold, they tested much stronger holding the fresh salad leaf versus the horrendous chemical artificial sweetener.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm on board.
and again, I fully admit that it's not statistically significant. It's not a proper scientific experiment, but as a sort of Heath Robinson anecdotal way of proving something to yourself, and the in-depth science has been done. David Hawkins was a fantastic, actual, legitimate scientist. I'm not claiming that.
This is what I've really enjoyed about the majority of this podcast has been, instead of us coming on here and speaking about the laws of attraction in a really blasé, naive, young-minded, flippant way, you can really explain the underground ongoings of why it works, or why parts of it have been depicted as a sort of a children's book, really. And I think that's important for people to know how the mind operates and how it works, and then you can actually start owning it. Yeah. So I want to talk now just a little bit about, or more so about, them uncontrollables that we talk about. Yeah. So the term of conspiracy and conspiratorial thinking and ideology, there's been times where it's really trapped my life, become quite ill from it, and just genuinely terrified to operate.
Yeah.
Do you think there are any in the ether, sort of maybe bubbling through at the minute, that it would be really beneficial for the listeners of the show to sort of be aware of and know about? Because I feel there's some, when people get a conspiracy, they take all of them in, and then they have no trust in anything, anyone, and the whole world's just a complete lie then. But I want to bring it round to the element of, you've got to be an individual, you've got to know what works for you and what doesn't. And maybe for me, the flat earth, there's a lot of interesting concepts within that, but it isn't helping my life. It's not helping me feed my daughter, it's not helping me in my day-to-day. But I can talk about all of them now, because my ego's not just engrossed in them.
Yeah.
But for those that may be interested in certain ones, are there any at the moment that you think, educate yourselves on this at the minute?
Yeah.
Have a look down the line. This is what I think humanity needs to know at the minute. Okay.
So first of all, I'm going to take issue with the phrase conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
So
you don't dare! I've got karate under my.
So yeah, I mean, I could quite comfortably be called a conspiracy theorist, but I mean, look at that as a phrase. A conspiracy theorist is someone that believes that generally super wealthy, powerful people conspire, i.e., meet in private to plan events that are to their benefit and often to our detriment. So if really in that sense a conspiracy theorist is a realist.
Yes.
And that the phrase conspiracy theory was coined by the CIA following JFK's assassination, because obviously there's a lot of questions that are still to be asked or still to be answered about JFK's assassination, and Joe Biden recently blocked the release of the classified JFK files, and that's been used as a derogatory, pejorative term since then to vilify people who will question the mainstream narrative. So that's it was used on aliens for a while. It's been used for decades on the flat Earth. There's the whole David Icke lizards thing, and then everything. The one that's been really within the social sphere over the past couple of years has been the whole COVID thing.
Yeah.
And there's been countless conspiracy theories about that. So perhaps the one that has been most strongly vilified over the years has been the flat Earth theory. And as you say, it doesn't help you to feed your daughter, but being cognizant of it and actually spending some time looking into it for yourself, when you realise that we in the mainstream narrative of the globe Earth, that it doesn't all stack up, that we haven't got all the answers, and that we are probably being lied to on a very large extent about that because that is the biggie for me, because people are ridiculed to such an extent, when you realise that, you know, we might be being lied to about this, in fact we probably are being lied to about this, then what else isn't true? And I forget who the quote's attributed to, but I believe it was a member of one of the intelligence agencies in the US. And I'm sure you'd find it, probably not on Google, but maybe on DuckDuckGo or Brave.
DuckDuckGo.
Yeah. But the quote is something along the lines of, we will know that our disinformation campaign is complete when the American people, when everything the American people believe to be true is a lie. And what's a bigger lie than the nature of, you know, the sphere that we inhabit? And a lot of people just will not give it the time of day, and they'll dismiss it right off the bat, because it has been so misrepresented. So just to qualify the fact that I'm not an expert, but I probably have a reasonably valid opinion in that I've been a physics teacher. I've taught physics to A level. I've studied out of interest advanced quantum physics theories. And there's a lot about the globe Earth that just doesn't stack up.
Really?
Yeah, so I'm not sitting here today going the Earth is flat, but there's a lot that really doesn't stack up. So, for instance, in the heliocentric globe Earth theory, the Earth gets denser and denser as you go down towards the core. Now, we've only drilled down something like 8 miles of a 12,000 kilometre diameter, or whatever the Earth is said to be. So we should be seeing increase in density all the way down. But when we've got down to that 8 miles or whatever the figure is, it's certainly nowhere near the core. The densities actually start to decrease. The mainstream explanation of how a planet forms is basically kind of like almost like a centrifuge. So out in the vacuum of space, there's stellar dust, and just by the laws of probability, some areas are denser than others. And then because of those areas of higher density, gravitation causes that denser area to start attracting together, and then as that happens, more and more particles from around the surrounding area are drawn in. That starts to spin, and then that allegedly causes planets to form. But one of the experiments that we teach in school as physics teachers to show that is you get a bucket of water and then you spin it around. You do it on a rope or you do it on your arm. But where does the water go? Have you done that experiment?
No, we're not. No.
Just have a
Picturing it.
Yeah.
I thought that was the Coriolis system.
So it's a simple centrifuge, but we use it to talk about the sort of the formation of planets and centrifugal force. But the water goes to the bottom of the bucket, so it goes to the outside of the circle that you're describing in the air.
Yeah.
So the densest matter is moving to the outside. So by spin and by gravitation, just logically, it doesn't make sense that in a planet the densest stuff is in the middle. So there then becomes an argument for, well, is the planet hollow then potentially? If you've got the densest matter around the outside, if we're drilling down and we're already starting to see a drop in density, and then there's a South African computer scientist called Jan Lamprecht who he disappeared for a while. I think he reappeared, but he'd done some fantastic computer modelling, which I'm fairly sure you won't find on the internet anymore. But the solid Earth globular theory does a bit of mental gymnastics to explain how primary waves and secondary waves from earthquakes propagate, particularly over to the other side of the globe. And I'm not going to be able to explain it without a diagram or anything, but essentially it has to do some mental gymnastics.
Should have come prepared, man.
Whiteboard. But a hollow Earth via Jan Lamprecht's model explains it perfectly. So for a lot of years, I thought, well, that logically makes sense. And the principle of Occam's razor should always be applied to trying to figure out what the truth is, and it's usually badly paraphrased to the simplest solution is quite often the correct one. So moving on from the idea of a hollow Earth to the fact that possibly we do live on a flat plane. In your experience, as in experientially, day to day, what evidence do you have that we live on a rotating ball that's flying through space?
I have nothing of day to day. My only experience would have been on an aeroplane and then sort of seeing the curvature as you're going up. Do you know when you sort of go to a certain part of the flight, I look out the window.
Do you know those windows are concave? Yeah,
I mean,
there's a curvature to the glass which distorts the.
That is my only understanding of it.
Yeah.
And again, I'm just gonna break apart as well everything, which is gonna be tricky, but I'm very much enjoying this. So, being your belief, because I really think people need to think for themselves, go on them explorations of information, and before you just accept blindly a truth is a truth, go on a path of finding a truth. So your feeling towards this as a conspiracy theory of what we just approached and spoke about is if they can lie about this, what else can they lie about?
Yeah.
What other paths can they take you on? Is that how you feel? When I sort of, again, people have asked me about certain what would be deemed as conspiracy theories, and the reason I've, I suppose maybe flippantly not gone down the road of one is because I've quite quickly thought about what I can do in my day-to-day reality with that as a belief pattern. And between is the earth hollow, is the earth flat, is the earth round, I've gone, it doesn't reflect in my day. It doesn't matter to me. But what you're saying, to take it a little further, is, but just let's extrapolate that is a lie, that hasn't been truthfully foretold. There could be a whole bunch round here that also that managed to sort of condition your reality, condition your thinking towards that. That makes a lot more sense. Why they'd besmirch that.
Yeah.
And
can we just try a little thought experiment as well?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so keep in the mindset of we live on a globe that orbits the sun, and where are you?
On the globe.
Where are you right now? Where's Mikey? Where are you physically?
On the bus in Ripley.
Yep.
In the UK.
Okay, where's that?
The UK, near Ireland, near Europe. That's about it.
Okay, where's near Ireland and near Europe? So zoom out a stage. Where's
Zooming
that?
out. We're getting towards Russia. We're getting towards America, Africa.
Yep. So that's and then zoom out again. So where are you?
New Zealand. I'm going to Australia.
Okay,
Greenland.
So you've more or less got the planet there, yeah. So step back from the planet. Where are you?
Going into space.
Okay, and then zoom out. Keep zooming out and tell me where you are. Keep zooming out.
It goes into the infinite then, doesn't it?
And how significant does that make you feel?
I mean, I've heard this in a YouTube clip. Have you heard the Pale Blue Dot? That was a beautiful video. And again, it makes me feel quite powerful. That makes me feel very insignificant on how minute we are.
Yeah.
But then to be so obsolete and to, in fact, not matter, makes me feel very free and powerful in that, I suppose.
I take your point. And the freedom inherent in that is potentially quite dangerous, because you can then believe that your actions are inconsequential and that it doesn't matter what you do. And a lot of people will feel quite isolated in that if we're on this tiny little blue space dot, 93 million miles from our own sun, infinitesimal distances from more intelligent life, then you can feel... I get what you mean about feeling powerful, but you can also feel incredibly lonely. And we can also believe that we're here by mistake, by happenstance. If you follow the heliocentric model and then the standard model to its logical starting point, that we're here by some cosmic accident, and again we can feel fairly inconsequential. And that can lead to, I think it was one of Aleister Crowley's tenets of do what thou wilt. And that, I personally think that is an undercurrent to the wide scale acceptance of the model of the universe as science teaches it, can lead people to feel powerful and also inconsequential, and therefore just do whatever they like. But if that's not the case, if we are potentially, if we're on a flat plane, that all ancient wisdom cultures told us we were. So from the Bible, looking at the Hebrew model of the world, through to the Vedas, which are probably the greatest wisdom tradition ever, to Norse, to South American, they all have us as a stationary plane that was made by intelligent creation. So if that is true, and I'm not saying it is, if it's true, then we're here for a reason, we're not just here by mistake. That's impossible, because all of those wisdom traditions have an intelligent creator, which places us here on purpose for a reason, which means you are very, very significant, and what you do does matter. So it completely negates any sort of nihilism that can come with the globular Earth scientific worldview.
Wow.
Sorry, go on.
No, it'd be good for me, for perhaps audience that are listening to this, and maybe me to ask some very naive questions that I'm feeling.
Yep.
That they may want to ask, but I'm daring to ask them at all time.
Can I just caveat that
Yeah.
I may not have the answers, but I can hopefully recommend some places to look.
That'd be perfect. Example, I'm sure I've heard a question along all the time. Well, what's at the end of it then?
The perfect question.
Yes.
So, as a psyop, to sort of rubbish and vilify the original sort of flat Earth movement, there was the Flat Earth Society was set up, and they actually made claims that the guy that founded it, I believe, claimed that he'd taken his boat to the end of the Earth. His boat had fallen off the end of the Earth, but he'd come back with this rock that had saved his life.
Right.
I mean, that is just absolute horseshit.
Yeah.
But the more scientific answer, and I don't mean mainstream scientific, because it's probably not for now, but the corruption within mainstream science is horrendous. It is literally broken. But the scientific approach, i.e. the questioning, the seeking of verifiable, repeatable, experimental truth, the answer that those flat earthers, people like Eric Dubay, would give, is that there is an enormous ice wall that is the circumference of the plane. So interestingly, if you look at the logo of the World Health Organization or of NATO, it's a map of the world laid flat on a circle, but it's not how you'd normally see the elevation. If you put a map of the world flat, it's a flat Earth map. It has the North Pole at the centre, and the South is the perimeter. And the South Pole is ostensibly an ice wall. If you look at any pictures of it, you can see that there is an ice wall that was predicted by religions, and even I think it was the 1958 edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, they even talked about the ice wall and finding the firmament or the dome. So bearing in mind, you and I, no member of the public, can go beyond a certain distance down south, and there is enormous military presence that patrols that area. If you try and take a boat beyond a certain latitude, you'll get turned around, you'll get threatened, and no one owns it either. And there is a huge amount of attention placed on it, but the short answer is an ice wall. And then the flip side of that is that the North Pole being at the centre is the magnetic epicenter of the Earth. And again, all ancient wisdom traditions have a mountain or the tree of life at the centre. They'll describe it, in some cultures it's called Mount Meru, some cultures it's referred to as the Tree of Life, and a lot of cultures will refer to that as the magnetic epicenter of the Earth. So hopefully that's a reasonable answer to what's at the edge.
I think it's a very fair answer. No, it's genuinely what I'm enjoying about this conversation is at no point have you felt absolute in your approach to it, and you've always kept that favourite word of the day, the nuance behind it is, well, here's an educated explanation and here's where I draw my sources from. But at no point have I felt you forcefully going, this is why you're dumb and this is why this is right. And I feel that is a lot of the time people's approaches to set beliefs is to slander and fight at a character for not understanding that route. And this is why I wanted you on at all point, to be able to speak of that grey and have these intellectual conversations or intellectual exchanged conversations where we're sitting there and going, well, the reason I believe this is because this, and if you can go far enough into that information, we can get on a real good level together. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's what the world needs more of now.
Absolutely.
Is listening and really giving forth the reason of why you believe in something. And if you can articulate it and put it forward with conviction, yet be able to listen back to here's another thought, I feel that the best outcomes are achieved from that. And that's kind of what my belief or job is to do with people.
I think in everyday conversations it's humility that's missing.
That's a great word.
There's too much fragility and ego, so everything I've just said could be absolutely wrong. I'm perfectly happy to accept that. Obviously I've been trained to an extent in physics, for instance. I've studied a lot myself, and there are three models that there will be people that will vehemently defend to the end, and we live in such a time of information saturation that it's incredibly difficult to discern what is true. And you can't, I don't think that you can get to the truth of a particular thing by just looking at that thing. So using this as an example, you can't get to the truth of what shape our realm is just by looking at that. You have to step back and take a 40,000 foot view, and there's a couple of really, really important questions. They're kind of the same thing, really, but the first one is who benefits from whatever is being expounded as the truth, and the second, which is a journalistic principle, which unfortunately really isn't followed in the mainstream anymore, is follow the money. So who benefits
the root of the problem?
Absolutely. Who benefits from a particular thing? And there's so many more things that don't stack up about the globular Earth theory. So just to maybe mention a few in case people do want to look into it. So every image that we've got of the Earth is a composite image. If you look close enough at a lot of the famous NASA images of the little blue marble, you can actually see evidence of Photoshop. You can see cloud patterns that have been copied and pasted. On Google Earth, you can't properly look at the North or the South Pole. The moon is, by the generally explained theory, is too big to be where it is in Earth's gravitational field. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. I think so the Earth is too big, and then we also say that the Earth controls the tides. It's the gravitational pull of the moon that controls the tides. But standing bodies of water, lakes, for instance, huge lakes, they don't have tides to the same extent, I don't believe. But there are explanations for that within sort of the flat Earth cosmology, if you like, that for me at least kind of resonate. And as you were saying about that gut feel earlier, and again looking at Occam's razor, where you go, when you put this all together, actually that kind of does make sense. So for instance, if the North Pole is at the centre and is a huge magnetic thing, water's diamagnetic, which means it will repel a magnetic field. So all these ancient cultures that have this tree of life or Mount Marie or whatever, this magnetic thing at the centre, have a whirlpool surrounding it as well. And you can make if you get a petri dish or something and stack strong circular magnets in it and fill it up with water, there'll be this really strong curve that will stay until the absolute last second, where the surface tension eventually just covers the magnets. But on a large scale, that would make sense. And the scientific Eric Debye, who I think is probably the best researcher on the whole flat Earth thing, he expands the idea that there's a toroidal energy field to every mass, and that's true, and it's observable whether it's a human body. Like the electromagnetic field emitted by the heart can be measured meters away from the body, and if you look at the electromagnetic field of a body, it's a torus. so like a double donut effectively, with like a vortex going down through the center and then coming out at the equator and back round. And that's observable in so many things in nature, in weather patterns. If you cut fruit open, so if you look at inside an orange or an apple, it's a torus. In pretty much all electromagnetic systems, you see this toroidal energy pattern repeated again and again and again. So why would that not be the same for the Earth? And the globe Earth, the hollow Earth, and the flat Earth can all have this toroidal energy field. But if you look at the flat Earth idea of it, where you've got this magnetic, hugely strong magnetic pole in the center of the plane, then the torus would go down and up through that point, which would suck the water in as per the whirlpool that's depicted in all these ancient cultures, and then that would come back out at the periphery, at the furthest point from the sun, and then would freeze, which gives us the Antarctic ice wall. And then that will remelt, and the Antarctic ice has been remelting at the same rate for centuries. So the global warming, the narrative shifted from global warming to climate change. And I don't know if you remember Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, whenever that was, about 20 years ago or whatever. I think we're all meant to be underwater by now, or whatever, or living in Waterworld, which obviously hasn't happened. And that fear-mongering has been propagated again and again and again, and has just been repackaged decade after decade. But I think it's over the past few years, we've seen record Arctic sea ice, and Antarctic ice is melting at the same rate. So it's a constant system, which aligns perfectly with this toroidal energy field. So again, I could be completely wrong. There's probably something significant that I've missed. But the fact that all of the globe pictures are composites, you can see Photoshop. The whole densest bit in the middle doesn't make any sense. Earthquakes don't make any sense. In terms of powerful telescopes and the ability to look out into the cosmos, it might not be true now, but certainly at a point in time, the Vatican owned something like 90% of the satellites that were trained on the sun. And people now that have got powerful SLR cameras like the Nikon P900 that's got something like an 83 times optical zoom, people are taking pictures of the planets, and they don't look anything like the clearly CGI'd images that we've all been taught they are. And the fact that we're taught this as a fact, as an absolute truth from such an early age, means we don't question it. You have to have not necessarily not an ego death, but you have to put ego aside. You have to humility again. You have to be humble enough to go, maybe there's something that I don't know here. Maybe something that I've held to be a self-evident truth really isn't. And real truth is always consistent. So for thousands of years, wisdom cultures have been teaching that this is the shape of the earth. This is our cosmos, and it does go into detail to say what more is beyond this. But modern physics and the heliocentric model have to keep expanding and changing the story slightly. For instance, we were at one point in time on a spinning globe around a stationary sun, but then there were more questions asked. So then we became on a spinning globe, orbiting a sun that's also orbiting the center of the galaxy, and again, it comes back to Occam's razor that there's a simpler explanation that just potentially feels more right. But I'd encourage anyone to go and have a look into it, because a lot of it really, really stacks up.
This is what I'm enjoying so much about even how I'm feeling during this podcast is I've got questions and I've got paths that I can go down to find out a bit more information, because a really, young, naive Mikey wouldn't have listened to that in a truth. But I think matured. I've been so wrong about so many things in my life that I know never to be absolute anymore, and always be listening. And the thirst for knowledge, the thirst for learning, the thirst for that quest is actually really beautiful.
Oh yeah,
and
absolutely.
poetic. I don't have to be right about everything anymore. Is wonderful.
Yeah, the truth is you'll be wrong about nearly everything. And yeah, you've got to accept that and just keep running with it.
It excites me, and going on them quests for knowledge, I know I'm not going to get lost anymore. I feel such a sense of strength in when I feel myself tipping or not feeling very well with it. I know how to approach it now. So this Mikey is going, oh, I'm really excited about looking at certain ways of being. But I do know old Mikey would have switched off, not listened, and then tried to put forward a fact that I know to discredit. But it's not a fact that I've been and explored and truthfully understood, or been anywhere of experience to tell you this is why I believe it. I would have just hashed it out from somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of people do. So what we're talking about now is more so than just the conversation of flat Earth. It's how people operate and how people think.
Yeah, and that's why I use this example as one to frame it, because it has been
good.
the most vilified conspiracy theory.
Yeah, it's a really good way of going about. I mean, I'll say the C word now, but COVID. No vaxxers. Simple as that. I've heard and been involved in conversations where people will just speak the jargon in their echo chamber so certain and so assertively onto somebody without having any botherment or any explanation. It's just, this is what I've heard. This is what I know. And what you've just beautifully articulated for the last 20 minutes there is why you have a belief and how you've had other beliefs that have opposed it and you've been open to them, but the most understood you've been because of all the information you've taken in is why you believe what you believe now.
I just add to that I'm not sure that I do believe it. It's it's information that I've come across that seems valid and at this point in time feels reasonable.
Yes.
As insane as it was when I started out looking down that path.
Yes.
And I think that's really important. That,
I suppose, sorry. Now somebody said this to me recently, and I've heard it before, but it's now wearing their beliefs, quote unquote, and opinions like clothes, rather than having it as skin. And I think a lot of people have tattooed and skin beliefs and opinions now, and this is what I kind of want this conversation to crescendo or really be the takeaway is not having such strong, forceful ways with them beliefs and opinions.
Yeah, absolutely.
But just being fascinated, being curious and wanting to learn and understanding there's so much beauty within that. And that, genuinely, from this conversation here, I felt parts of my psyche where I'd not considered, but the not considering, I make up words all the time. I love it.
Keep hold of that one.
The not considering those parts of it, I've also reflected to, but I have not gone on any paths to find out the other. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And to be sat with the belief of, I think the earth is like this, without going on them paths, makes no sense as well.
Yeah. If something that you believe is true, then the counter argument should be able to be refuted.
Yes.
So, if you have a belief in something, then really, if you are steadfast in that belief, then you should have the confidence. You should have sort of the anti-fragility. You should put your ego aside and be able to go and explore the counter arguments and the refutations of it. Because one of two things are going to happen. You're either going to learn something and your core belief is going to be shaken and changed, or you are going to get the validation and the proof that you were on the right path anyway. And neither of those things can be a bad thing. Yes, having a core belief shaken, having your world literally flipped upside down, figuratively flipped upside down, is uncomfortable in the first instance, but the only thing that can come from that is personal growth. And that's happened to me on a number of occasions. So diet was one thing. I used to be the world's not the world's biggest meat eater, but my diet was predominantly meat based.
Nearly like carnivore style.
Yeah, almost like a carnivore paleo type thing, and then sort of wanted to almost reaffirm my beliefs, and then started reading things that were counter to it, and then trying to disprove those counter things to bolster my own beliefs, and then ultimately had to take a bit of a slice of humble pie and sort of change direction on that.
When you play devil's advocate with your own belief, what came true in the vegan diet that sort of shattered the carnivore approach?
Okay, so there's a fantastic book called The China Study by a researcher called T. Colin Campbell, which was really sort of the cornerstone of my shifting my belief, and having always been athletic, having grown up in health and fitness, obviously there's the whole protein. You need animal products for complete proteins. And then here is T. Colin Campbell making an incredibly bold claim that animal protein is one of the most instrumental cancer-causing mechanisms. Excuse me. So I appreciate this is very sensitive, but the book is worth a read, and I couldn't find any honest refutation of it. So
when
it
you
started.
Talk of synchronicity, I got told this book yesterday.
Oh, really?
By Ian Sleeman. Do you know him?
No.
Amazing guy.
Yeah.
54, built beautifully sculpted.
Yeah.
They took me on a training session yesterday, but again, we got into this vegan diet, and he told me about this book. So just thinking of synchronicities, my eyes and ears are really fixated on you right now. I'm like, go on then.
Let's just, before we dive into that, let's just address the term vegan, because there is now a narrative shift and a promotion of veganism, and that's not necessarily for the best. So bearing in mind, you could you could eat Oreos and Greg's vegan sausage rolls and call yourself a vegan.
Yeah.
And there's all these fake meats and things that are being sold in their millions currently, and that's not helping anyone's health. That is helping the bottom line of the people that were previously selling a shit ton of processed meat. So the term vegan has a lot of emotion attached to it, but is also kind of misleading in that what the research says. And when I say research, you've got to be. Nutrition is a minefield of research. And with all things, when you're seeking the truth, you've got to cast your net really far and wide. So you have to look at not only lab studies, but the repeatability of those lab studies and population studies and the length of time that studies have been done over. Essentially, if you want to prove that some facet of a diet is beneficial, if you have a lab-based study over a short period of time with enough scientific adjustment and stuff, I think everyone knows that you can lie with statistics. You can prove essentially that any diet that you want is optimal. But what T. Colin Campbell and now countless other people have proven, particularly through the China study work, was that in terms of whole health and longevity, whole food plant-based diet is optimal. And that's not to say that all animal products need to be completely eradicated for optimal health. I'm not saying that at all. That was my choice for a bunch of reasons, but that's not necessarily what the research says. But it's about the majority of your caloric intake coming from whole foods plant-based diet. So the initial study started off with lab rats. And they were exposed to aflatoxin, which is an incredibly potent carcinogen. And the two groups of lab rats were fed diets containing, I think one was 5% and one was 20% casein protein. And in almost 100% of the cases, the lab rats fed with the high degree of animal protein, whilst exposed to the carcinogen, developed cancer and died, whereas the low animal protein group didn't. So obviously there's a whole bunch of things you can say about that, and the first one that jumped at me is we are not rats. interestingly, a lot of the recommendations for the percentage of protein that you need in your diet does actually derive from rat studies. So that's probably a conversation for another time, but that doesn't hold water either. So a rat study on its own isn't good enough. But the book's called the China Study because it's the biggest epidemiological population study ever done on nutrition and health. And they studied as much of China as they could and looked at cancer rates in different areas. And they found that without any kind of without any shadow of a doubt, the people living, the rural populations that predominantly ate rice and vegetables, cancer was almost non-existent.
Right.
And you've seen cancer rates just exponentially grow around the world when Eastern countries have adopted Western diets. So the Okinawa Japanese that were the longest lived population in the world for a long period of time. So yes, they're a coastal community and there is an amount of seafood in their diet. I'm not disputing that at all, but it's predominantly whole foods and plant based that they ate, with the seafood as an addition of sort of flavouring. So they were the longest lived population for a long period of time, and Okinawa has become quite westernised like everywhere else.
It's to intersect with that as well, and let's go on the back of it, and the epidemiology studies. There's so much nuance that lies within them, isn't there, as well? Because I suppose then you're looking at sort of what meats they're eating.
Yeah.
A lot of sort of, salami, processed meats go along with a lot of cancers as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I suppose, again, another theory and factor is a lot of meat eaters. I've heard this in Paul Salandino. Have you heard of him?
Yeah, I don't know him.
Nutritionist,
Yeah.
but he came out with the carnivore code. But he had a brilliant back and forth with somebody who was advocating the vegan diet, and actually their intellectual exchange was brilliant. One of my favourite podcasts on nutrition that I'd heard for a while, and both explaining their understandings and their learnings and research.
Yeah.
It was perfect. When you see two people that needed to collide come together, amazing. But when they were speaking of the epidemiology studies, Paul Salandino was also saying, a lot of meat eaters, quote unquote, can be risk takers as well, and will be introduced to smoking maybe. They don't add that into the equation, and
it's like the whole sunbeds and skin cancer thing. Like sunbeds don't. You can't prove that sunbeds cause skin cancer. It's the people that use them historically more and develop, unfortunately, skin cancers do have other people, more unhealthy
those
habits.
people that are often using sunbeds, could you contribute what they do as a collective, like how they operate?
Yeah, there might be a higher propensity of smoking, for instance.
So it's really interesting. It's hard when you're using epidemiology studies, isn't it, to find a root or a true answer within it, because there's just so people said this word so much, but that nuance within it, the conversations that can lie, it's really hard to quantify down. So then you're saying they took, was it the epidemiology study first, this was a truth, and then they took it to rats, or was it the other way round?
It started up, the idea came from a rat study, and actually the guy that led the work, he grew up on a dairy farm, so he was actually out to prove that the high protein diet was the healthy one, and then he realised this thing that effectively by exposing the lab rats to a powerful carcinogen and then combining that with high degrees of animal protein, it effectively switched the cancer on. But the low protein version switched it off. So it's, again, trying to find the truth of anything, you've got to step back and take that 40,000 foot view. And the I forget the name of the guy that authored the book, but the Blue Zone study. So that looked at all of the longest lived cultures around the world, and almost without exception, they were predominantly whole food, plant-based eaters. So I'm certainly not saying that for longevity people need to go vegan. Absolutely not. But getting the majority of calories from whole food, plant sources, fresh fruits and veg, grains, pulses, blah blah blah. Everyone knows what whole plant foods are.
So that's
is
where,
undoubtedly the healthiest way to go.
And when you're looking at the ancestry route, Paul lived with it. Have you heard of the Hadza tribe? I think there are known closest ancestries to date that live in the Amazon.
Okay.
And he went and lived with them, but again, they ate meat, but it's called the nose to tail diet, where they'll have, again, all the organs within it.
Okay.
And they'll go on that 3-day hunt together, and they turn it into a very ritualistic moment.
And you've got fasting in there as well.
Yes, 100%. And they'll utilise every part of that meat, and it lasts for a long, long time within all the tribe, and they're not just eating mindless amounts of meat that have been fed. I mean, honestly, the factory farmed meat that we have now, they're eating biscuits, they're cookies, plastics.
Yep, they're full of antibiotics.
Just fatten them up as much as possible. And I mean, you are what you eat sort of concept.
Absolutely.
That really springs to mind. And, you know, how we're eating now, so let's talk the UK now, we're not going on hunts, and we're not going out together to find that one meal that can feed our family for 6 months.
And we're not going time without food as well, which is hugely important.
100, because that fasting is one of the best things I've ever implemented in my life, the healthiest I've felt. But I love diet chats, I love nutrition chats, because the best thing to do is implement it, try it out, see how you feel, and it comes down to that. And you know, I bought the book after listening to the podcast, The Carnivore Code, and really did find a butcher that was closely represented what I wanted, like really grass-fed, cared about his produce. And I ate the kidneys, I ate the liver, I ate everything about it, and fasted and drank water, and it's the best I ever felt. But then started implementing vegetables in my diet. I essentially did an exclusion diet there.
Okay,
And then felt really healthy again, because I've been feeling really ill for a while. And then certain vegetables would inflame me, and then certain vegetables made me feel really energized and ready to go. And then I'd take certain meats out of my diet. And I was being playful with it, but truly connecting and thinking about how I was feeling.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good study to do as an individual.
We're so disconnected from what we're doing to, obviously we started off talking about self-talk and thoughts and things. We're disconnected from how that affects us. We're also disconnected from what we put into our body, how that affects us. But back to nuance, and there's so much complexity within that. So when you start changing your diet, your gut microbiome needs to adapt as well. So things that would potentially over the longer term be beneficial or be harmful to you don't manifest as that in the first instance. So Morgan Spurlock, when he did Super Size Me, I guess you've seen that.
Yeah.
So as I remember it, he'd come from eating pretty healthily, so predominantly whole foods, blah blah blah. And the first few days that he was force feeding himself fast food, it was making him violently ill. So splitting headaches, nausea, and that's because his gut microbiome, all the microorganisms in there that obviously live symbiotically with us, were set up to digest a particular type of diet. A diet that, in his case, going into the experiment, was to his benefit. But then as he changed his diet and force-fed himself fast food over the month or however long it was, his gut microbiome changed. So the bacteria in there that were set up, that were there to help digest the healthy foods, were then replaced by ones that wanted to digest unhealthy food. So effectively his own gut bacteria became pathogenic. So for their survival, they needed stuff that was actually toxic and very detrimental to him. And that's something that if you are making wholesale shifts in your diet, you have to be very careful of. So it's all about the long term stuff. So for instance, a paleo type, caveman, carnivore, or whatever, those kind of diets, will be quite often in a short-term period be incredibly beneficial because you've cut out a load of toxins. It allows your body to detox. There's also quite often a calorie deficit associated with it. But then long term, if you're in a ketogenic state long term, that's a survival mechanism. It's not what we're meant to run on. So, how many trillion cells are there in the body, and that those cells are primarily built to run on glucose, which is why, say for the short term, those kind of diets will make you feel really good because your body will clear out, and you've cut out a load of shit. But long term, your body, your brain, everything is built to run on glucose. And there's even probably shouldn't get into the theory of evolution here, but there is the commonly expounded idea of why we leapt in our evolution and developed this big brain was animal protein.
Is that the Stone Ape theory?
Yeah. But there's also the idea that actually that's around the sort of time that we mastered fire as well. And by mastering fire, we were then able to start cooking and thereby consume much larger quantities of starchy vegetables. Yeah. And your brain, again, runs on glucose. So
I've heard psychedelics as a bit of monkeys discovering mushrooms.
Yeah. You heard the psychedelic Christmas theory?
Oh, I'm ready for this. Just to dance around this for a little bit longer. Again, a couple of thoughts I've had in the build-up of this is when we mention toxicities, what about plant toxicity? Because obviously, say if we went foraging now and just started rooting and picking up plants, we'd die very quickly. With the plant toxicity and build-up, if we went out now and started eating certain meats, wouldn't die as fast as long as it was cooked right and so on. But with plant toxicity, this was a thought and a theory. Everything's an organism, a living organism, wants to survive, wants to thrive. Yep. Plants have been rooted and fixated in the ground, thus needing to build up mechanisms and ways of surviving. Would their toxicities not be stronger than something that's built a mechanism like legs or sharper teeth to fight away its predator?
Potentially so. Plants have been here longer than us, right? What if, and this is just a thought out of left field, but it baked my noodle when I heard it. What if actually plants were instrumental in the development of animals, including us, that eat them? So if you eat a strawberry and you digest it, and then if we were living in our natural habitat, you then go and have a shit somewhere in the woods, and those seeds you wouldn't have digested, and you would be proliferating the growth of strawberry plants. So there's a counter thought, and that's all I'm saying. It is just a thought that we want the whole of our ecosystem is all inextricably linked. So maybe part of our function, part of our reason for being, is to actually help propagate and proliferate other species. And
the other thing is sort of, again, comes back to over farming and just on huge scale, which never really seems to benefit the planet. No. But when we say we're vegan, it's very hard still. You've got to be conscious, haven't you? In what you're consuming and eating, because if you look at when they're ploughing the fields or so on, and all the birds are coming behind them and flying low, is because all the animals that are being killed at the same time as when they're farming sort of soybean or any vegetable really. To do it on such a mass scale, it's very hard to consciously buy your food. How can I just hear a bit of an idea on how you get your vegetables then, and it's sort of the most conscious choice you can go down?
Okay. So that's one of the common arguments that people use to kind of refute or rebut the idea of the environmental benefit of adopting a plant-based diet. And the way I normally address that is, say, think back to your school biology lesson where we talked about pyramids of biomass. So plants are always at the bottom, and then as the pyramid gets narrower, there's...
Wasn't it bread and stuff at the bottom back in the day?
I think you're probably thinking about the nutrition pyramid with the food groups and stuff, but a pyramid of biomass basically illustrates in different steps the mass of a provider to sustain a consumer, and up and up and up. So let's say if we were let's keep it simple. Let's go from plants to farm animals to humans. So there has to be an amount of plant-based food to feed an amount of farm animals, and the mass of the plant-based food to provide for that population is smaller than the amount that we will get from it. So there's actually inherent in eating animal foods, there's a biological inefficiency. Basically, you are filtering your nutrients. If you're eating animals, you're filtering your nutrients through the animals, but there's a wastage of energy in the movement, the respiration, the sensitivity, the growth, the reproduction, the excretion of the animals that you're eating. So people will argue that eating a plant-based diet is harmful to biodiversity because you would need such large-scale farming of crops to feed people. But the vast majority of, you mentioned soybeans, the vast majority of soy that's farmed around the world is used to feed farm animals that we will then eat. So there's a huge actual efficiency gain by eating the plant foods in the first place. Yes, those plant foods are less calorically dense than an animal food is. So calorie for calorie, you need to eat a greater quantity of food, but the losses through the pyramid of biomass are far greater than by going direct to source. Because it's a fundamental physics principle that energy can't be created or destroyed. It can only change from one form to another, and in all of those transfers of energy, there are inefficiencies, and you lose energy in forms that aren't useful. And
that's a good answer.
Obviously, what we want from eating a cow is we want the nutrients that are contained within the meat. What isn't useful to us is the movement of that animal, the reproduction of that animal, unless we're going to eat the reproduced. That's not useful to us, which is part of the reason that factory farming came around, because it's efficient. If you look into it, it's horrific, but it's efficient. We literally couldn't feed the world sufficiently if everyone survived predominantly on sort of wild pastured grass-fed cattle. And absolutely agree that if you are eating animal products, and that's everyone's personal choice, I pass no moral judgment whatsoever, that's where you'd want to get it from, because you know that those animals, albeit bred and killed for our purposes, actually have some quality of life. But there isn't the space available. Again, taking the standard model of the globe that we live on, but there isn't the space available to feed everyone through that method. So the most efficient way to eat is a whole food plant-based diet. And then for me, really, I know I could do a lot better in this regard, but I buy organic when I can. Obviously, there's a price factor that comes into that for a lot of people. And one of the things that I'd like to do is I'd like to do much more of my shopping locally sourced. And ultimately, I'd like to grow my own as well.
I think that is
I've
the
just not got
best
there.
way, isn't it?
Absolutely.
If you can grow your own, that seems to be, you can eat with genuine purity about you. We again, just in the orchard, there's no greater feeling than when my mum comes in and it's a cucumber, tomato, all the herbs and spices, and you know it's literally just come out of the garden. I think, and it tastes so different, doesn't it? Really, the freshness.
And I think the same is true for animals as well. I think if you were to breed your animals and you physically slaughtered those animals yourself, then there's no moral question over what you're doing there. I can't see a moral argument against that. Other than what right have we got to take the life of another sentient being? But if it's for your survival and part of the whole...
Two conversations there, isn't there?
Yeah.
It's the morality of it, and then there's the optimal of it.
Yeah.
What is optimal health?
Yeah.
And then when you bring in the morality of it, that's somewhere where I'm definitely contradicted on.
Yeah. Sorry, that's my point actually. Yeah. I didn't mean that I can't take moral issue with it. Obviously, I can take moral issue with it, and I'm not going to. I'm not here to preach about anything. But there's no hypocrisy in it. Is what I was trying to get to. In that if you breed an animal, you make sure it lives in good conditions, and you're the person that kills it to consume it. There's no hypocrisy there. But it's the cognitive dissonance that I think a lot of people do take issue with, and the fact that. We encourage the cognitive dissonance by not actually calling food what it is. So we don't call ham dead pig. Yeah. It's ham or it's bacon or whatever.
Tortured baby cow.
Yeah.
I'd stop eating that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Again, another element of the podcast. I listen to these back.
Yeah.
I just really enjoy.
I think this is probably a longer conversation for another day, I think.
Yeah, I really enjoy conversation. I really enjoy the art form of it, and particularly the fact that certain conversation can make you go on paths and make you go on journeys of exploration. And we've had so many today where I've gone, this is great. Yeah. I've got stuff to take away. We're nearly 2 hours in. Yeah. We're going to have to call it quits at some point.
I think now is probably the time, mate.
I mean, what I've got to say to you here is I've never podcasted with anybody more deserving of having their own little podcast platform.
Right.
more for me, I really would love it if you did. It's such an awesome human that actually has put into practice all of the lessons of life as shown to give them. And I think there'll be so many people that could listen to you on a regular and take away so much. So that's all I'm saying. I'm leaving that on
That's
there.
Incredibly kind of you, mate. I'm not sure that's necessarily true.
Honestly, it really is. There's been times where I've been sitting here in the most hypnotized manner.
But that's what this is.
Yes, thank God. Swinging at me. That's his ball sack, everyone that's not looking at this, watching it. Mate, say somebody's been really inspired today and gone, you know what, I have been rigid and stuck in my beliefs, and this man has just made me think other and differently. Where could they reach out to maybe you, or where would you send them on a bit of a path of journey of exploration and learning? Some good books.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, I'm not very active on there, but I'm on the usual social media places. So obviously Facebook and Instagram.
You might have to spell out your second name, mate. I'm going to be honest.
Donegani.
Nice. Say it one more time.
Donegani. So you happily connect with me on there, and I'll help anyone with any inquiries as best I can. But in terms of subjects that we've covered today, so obviously trying to work from back to front. We talked about nutrition, so I'd recommend T. Colin Campbell's The China Study. It's a big old read. Or Dr. Garth Davis's Proteinaholic. That's an interesting place to start. Flat Earth stuff, if it's not too much off the wall. Anything by Eric DeBay. He's done a lot of great videos, but he's also got books out. He's self-published the books, I think. And if you want to find his videos, you'll probably have to go elsewhere than YouTube, probably BitChute or places like that. A guy called Ewar Anon as well has done some fantastic work in that area. EWARANON. And then the sort of broader spectrum conversation we had up the top. So I started with the recommendation of Paul McKenna, which is I think it is a really good starting point, no matter what you think of the guy.
I really like him.
Yeah. But then there's the usual law of attraction stuff, which is well worth reading. Your stuff by Rhonda Byrne, the secret stuff, the Abraham Hicks stuff has an immense amount of value in it. And then the flip side of that coin that we talked about is the stoicism stuff. So starting with anything by Ryan Holiday, The Obstacle is the Way is fantastic. Or go back to the source. So Marcus Aurelius, Meditations, Epictetus, Enchiridion. David Hawkins, we touched on him. David Hawkins, Power versus Force. I'm sure there's a million other things that we touched on that I'm not naming resources for currently. But maybe if we have a think about it afterwards and put anything on the notes.
On the note,
Yeah.
You're very professional to say you've not got a podcast.
I've watched a few of them.
Mate, this has been wonderful. Honestly,
Yeah, really enjoyed it.
I'd love to do it again.
Yeah,
I really would. I'm gonna go and do a little bit of learning. I might have some even books inside where it could cross-reference with some of your thoughts and see what you think to some of them.
Yep.
Like the Carnivore Code and so on. I know you like to just be neutral and listen and go, oh, okay, this is why they think that.
Yeah.
And it either strengthens your argument, or it gives you a new perspective.
Yeah, and it might genuinely be that you supply me with something. I go, actually, no, I've been completely wrong, and I pivot and move to a carnivore diet. I'm completely open to that.
I can see a podcast stemming from this, mate. Together, we could if we could condense them down to like 30 minutes on a topic.
Yeah,
I think that'd be amazing.
Okay,
so we'll have a chat about that. But
fantastic.
I'm not pinning you on a podcast now. So gonna do it, aren't you?
That sounds great.
Yeah,
mate, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you. You're
guys,
a wonderful human.
You've been a part of the Old Farm Bus Back of the Bus Sessions podcast. I'm gonna leave you on this. I always do. I always will. Just be nice to one another, you beautiful buggers. All you gotta do. Cheers, man.
Thanks, Marcus.